The year was 1938, when the earth around Nashville seemed to breathe in dust instead of air. The Great Depression had turned songs into murmurs and faith into a whisper that only a few dared to repeat. Along a narrow dirt road, where the wind carried the scent of tobacco and sweat, a horse stood half-starved, his coat dull as rusted copper. His ribs rose and fell like the planks of a sinking ship, and his one good eye glimmered with something that should have already died: endurance. Men called him Beast, a word they spat more than spoke. They said he had worked a dozen farms and survived them all, that he had seen more whips than sunsets. He didn't kick, didn't bite, didn't break, and that made him useful. In those times, usefulness was the same as mercy. But mercy had run thin in those parts. A girl watched him from the fence, barefoot, her dress torn at the hem. Clara. No kin left, just the memory of her mother's song, a slow, trembling hymn about light finding its way through broken things. When she sang softly under her breath, the horse turned his head toward her as though catching a scent of something long forgotten. The men laughed. "That thing don't hear nothing but his own pain," they said. But one morning, when the frost clung to every nail in the barn, she knelt by his stall and whispered a prayer, not to heaven, but to him. "If you can hear me, just breathe." The horse's chest shuddered. A warm breath clouded the air. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang once. That was the first miracle nobody wanted to see. The day a child's prayer found an ear that wasn't human. Before we walk into that valley of dust and faith, hit like, subscribe, and comment the city and state you're watching from. Every story that survives does so because someone listened, just like he did. The flood of 1937 had swallowed half the valley, leaving behind silt splinters and ghosts. Houses gone, crops gone, names gone. The Harlan farm stood on higher ground, but not high enough to escape bitterness. Mr. Harlan was a man built from labor and loss, shoulders curved like the hills he plowed. His wife barely spoke anymore, and the church sat 3 miles down the road, too far for sinners who no longer believed forgiveness was worth the walk. Clara had been left with them after the flood took her parents. The preacher said she needed a roof and a routine. Harlan needed another pair of hands. She scrubbed floors, carried pails, and ate what was left at the table after supper. At night, she would sit outside with her father's old harmonica and play faint cracked notes that wandered into the dark. In the barn, the horse would lift his head every time the music started. He didn't understand the tune, but he felt it, like warmth pressed against bone. His ear twitched to each breath between notes. Clara began to believe he listened because no one else did. She told him about the river, about how her mother's hair had floated like a ribbon on the water, about how her father had prayed for rain to stop and it hadn't. "Maybe God got tired of listening to people," she said. "Maybe he listens to animals now." The horse snorted, a low sound that made the candle flame tremble. For the first time since she'd arrived, Clara smiled. She didn't know that outside, behind the barn door, Harlan was listening too, and that the sound of her voice, small and steady in the cold, would begin to carve through the stone of his silence. That night, thunder rolled beyond the hills. The barn shook, and for one suspended heartbeat, it sounded like the earth itself was praying back. The morning began before light touched the valley. A thick mist hung over the Harlan fields, turning the world into a single grey breath. Mr. Harlan woke first, as he always did, grinding his teeth against the silence. He pulled on his boots, spat dust, and reached for the whip that leaned against the doorframe. The boards creaked beneath his weight. Out in the barn, the horse waited, still, patient, half-ghost. The sound of the latch snapped through the cold air. Harlan's hands were calloused from 40 years of pulling life out of unwilling soil. "Move, beast," he muttered, voice gravel and rust. The horse obeyed without fight, stepping into the traces with the same weary grace he had every morning. Each hoof sank into the frozen ground, leaving perfect impressions that filled with fog. Clara watched from the porch, small and quiet, her hair tangled with sleep. She held a tin cup of water that trembled in her fingers. The wind carried the smell of iron and sweat, and for a moment she thought it smelled like rain, but it was only the river rising somewhere far away. When Harlan cracked the whip, she flinched. The horse didn't. His eye, the one that still saw, flickered once toward her, then steadied. She whispered a line from her mother's hymn, "Light finds what men forget." Hours passed. The sun lifted, weak and pale. By noon, the field steamed like a pot. The plow dug deep furrows that bled with mud. Clara carried a bucket of water toward the horse, her bare feet sinking. Harlan grunted. "Don't coddle him, girl. He's got work, not feelings." She said nothing, only held the bucket steady. The horse drank slow, each swallow echoing like a drumbeat inside her chest. She reached to touch his muzzle. He didn't shy away. A small scar under his jaw felt warm against her fingertips. "You earned every mark," she whispered, "but you're still here." That night, when the house fell asleep, Clara lit a stub of candle and crept to the barn. The air smelled of hay and damp wood. The horse stood motionless, head bowed as if waiting for confession. She tore a piece of bread from her pocket and offered it. He took it gently, teeth brushing her palm. "You're not beast," she said softly. "You're just the only one who listens." Outside, the wind rose. The candle flame bent sideways but did not die. She closed her eyes and prayed. "If you're up there, take care of him. He's the one who still believes." Something shifted. A small sound, not thunder, not breath, but the groan of old wood moving like a heartbeat. She opened her eyes to see the horse looking straight at her. His chest rose and fell once, heavy and certain, as though he had answered. By the next morning, talk had started among the workers. "That little orphan sings to the plough horse," one man said. "Says he listens." Laughter followed, sharp as nails. Harlan heard it and felt the sting, though he'd never admit it. The girl's voice followed him through the day, a thin thread of sound weaving between the furrows, soft but unbroken. He told himself it was foolishness. Yet when the sun dipped and he walked past the barn, he paused to listen. Inside, Clara sang low, the tune winding like smoke. The horse shifted his weight in rhythm. For a heartbeat, Harlan saw something impossible: peace. The word frightened him more than hunger. He slammed the door to make it stop, but the melody lingered. That evening, over supper, his wife Mary asked quietly, "You ever wonder why the Lord leaves the good ones to starve?" Harlan didn't answer. The question hung in the air like a ghost they all recognized. Weeks passed. The frost melted, leaving behind mud thick enough to swallow a boot. Clara grew stronger from work, though her arms were thin and her hands raw. Each morning she rose before the sun to brush the horse's coat, humming the same tune. The scars under his mane began to soften. His ribs no longer showed like fences. One dawn, Harlan found her asleep beside him, curled in the hay. He raised the whip, habit, not hate, then stopped. The sight froze him. The animal standing guard, head lowered, breath misting over the child like warmth. He lowered his arm and walked away, muttering, "Fool thing, both of you." But that night, as rain whispered on the roof, Harlan dreamt of the river that had taken his sons years ago. In the dream they were riding, laughing, wild, and the same horse carried them across water that glowed like glass. He woke before dawn, heart hammering, unsure if the tears on his cheeks were his or the rain's. The following Sunday, the church bell rang hollow across the hills. Harlan's wife walked with Clara down the dirt road while he stayed behind to mend tools. The girl carried the harmonica she'd found in an old box of her father's things. When the sermon ended, she stepped outside and played. The notes were crooked, but they carried. In the distance, the horse neighed once, loud and clear, echoing through the valley. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "He's answering her." By afternoon, word had spread. "The preacher's orphan's got a gift," they said. "Her prayers make the beast speak." Some laughed. Some crossed themselves. Harlan heard the talk and slammed his fist against the wall. "Superstition," he growled. Yet when he looked toward the barn, the door stood open, light spilling through dust like gold. He walked inside. Clara stood beside the horse, eyes closed, whispering. Harlan stopped a few paces away. "Girl," he said, "you think God listens through animals?" She turned to him slowly. "Maybe through anything that ain't learned to lie." The words struck him harder than any sermon. He opened his mouth to scold her, but couldn't. The horse shifted, nudging her shoulder as if agreeing. Harlan turned away, muttering under his breath, "Fool child, fool world." That night a storm rolled in, thick with thunder. The air snapped with electricity. The horse stomped and neighed, restless. Clara ran to the barn barefoot, hair whipping in the wind. "Easy," she whispered. "It's just noise." Lightning flashed through the cracks in the boards, painting the world in white. The horse reared, pulling free of the post. She caught the reins with both hands, digging her heels into the mud. "Don't be scared," she cried. Another flash, then silence. When her eyes cleared, the animal stood still, breathing heavy but calm. Outside, thunder rolled away. The storm broke apart over the hills. She rested her forehead against his neck. "You listened," she said. "You always listen." The next morning, the valley woke to stillness. Harlan found Clara and the horse asleep together again, light pouring over them through the open door. For the first time in years, he didn't reach for the whip. He whispered instead, "Maybe she ain't wrong." He didn't know that far down the road the church bell rang once, and the sound carried all the way to the barn. Spring arrived slow that year, like an old hymn being remembered line by line. The fields of Nashville's outskirts turned from gray to brown, from brown to green, but the air still carried the chill of something unfinished. The river had calmed after the flood, yet its banks were lined with bones of trees and scraps of roofs from homes it had eaten. People said it was God's reminder that faith could build or break depending on how you held it. Clara didn't know much about faith, only that the horse seemed to live on it. She named him quietly one morning when no one was listening. "Solomon," she whispered, because the preacher once said that Solomon had asked for wisdom instead of power, and the horse's eyes looked wise enough to forgive the world. From that day, she spoke his name like a prayer, soft and careful. "Good morning, Solomon," she'd murmur while brushing his coat. "You dream anything last night?" The animal answered only with breath, but there was rhythm in it. Sometimes when she sang while cleaning the stalls, he would stomp once, as though keeping time. It made her laugh. A real laugh, the kind that made the dust motes dance. One evening, a traveling trader rode through the valley with a wagon full of tools and gossip. His name was Bishop, a man with slick hair and a voice too loud for the quiet land. He stopped at the Harlan farm, chewing on a piece of straw. "Heard you got a horse that prays," he said, grinning. "Mind if I see?" Harlan grunted. "You want to see work, not worship." Bishop laughed, climbing down. "Ain't often I meet a beast holier than a man." They walked to the barn. Clara stood inside humming while Solomon chewed hay in silence. Bishop squinted. "That's him? Looks half dead." "Half's enough," Harlan replied. The trader stepped closer and snapped his fingers near Solomon's face. The horse didn't flinch. "Blind on one side," Bishop muttered. "How's he good for anything?" Clara turned sharply. "He hears what others can't." The trader smirked. "You talk to it like it's a preacher." "Maybe he's the only one still listening," she said. Bishop's grin faded. For a second he couldn't meet her eyes. "Strange child," he muttered, stepping back. "I'd buy that animal if you're done preaching." Harlan shook his head. "Ain't for sale." Bishop chuckled. "Everything's for sale." But when he tried to lead his own horse away, the animal refused to move. Frozen, ears flat, eyes wide on Solomon. The trader cursed, pulling hard on the reins. Still nothing. Clara smiled slightly. "Maybe yours heard something too." After Bishop left, the farm returned to its rhythm of work and silence. Days melted together like wax. Clara's prayers became habit, her songs part of the air itself. Even Harlan's wife, Mary, began to hum when she thought no one was listening. The house, once a shell of sighs, started to hold warmth again. One night, Mary found Clara outside staring at the sky. "You waiting for something?" she asked. "The sound," Clara said. "When I pray, sometimes it answers back." Mary frowned. "What kind of sound?" "Like when you put your ear to a train track. Distant, but real." Mary's face softened. "Maybe it's your mama." Clara shook her head. "No, Mama sang higher. This sounds lower, like the ground's breathing." The woman didn't reply. She simply laid a hand on the girl's shoulder and left her there, the stars flickering like candle flames over an altar of dirt. Summer came with a cruel heat. The wells thinned. The crops sagged, tempers frayed. Harlan shouted more, slept less, and carried his whip like a habit he couldn't break. But Solomon's endurance never faltered. Even under the burning sun, he moved steady, dragging the plow through stubborn soil. Clara brought water every few hours, whispering to him, cooling his face with rags. One afternoon, Harlan caught her praying aloud beside the trough. "You think he'll feed you if you starve yourself," he barked. She stood, dust clinging to her legs. "He feeds me already, just not with food." His eyes darkened. "Don't make me teach you manners, girl." The words burned like dry straw. But before he could strike her, Solomon let out a sound, deep and guttural, a cry that shook the barn. It wasn't fear, it was fury. Harlan froze. The air around them felt charged, almost holy. For a long moment, No one moved. Then, quietly, Clara said, "See? He don't like cruelty either." Harlan turned and left without another word. That night, the rain returned after months of silence. The first drops hit the roof like footsteps. Clara ran to the barn, laughing, arms spread wide. She stood beside Solomon, both of them drenched, both of them smiling. Lightning flashed through the doorway, white and merciful. "We made it," she whispered. "You prayed harder than me." The horse exhaled, long and heavy, and bent his head until his forehead rested against hers. For a second, the world shrank to the sound of their breathing. Then thunder broke it open again. Mary watched from the porch, hand on her chest. Harlan stood behind her, silent. "She's bringing ghosts back with those songs," Mary murmured. He didn't answer. His jaw worked, but no sound came. When he finally turned, the whip was gone from his belt. As days passed, something strange began to happen. Strangers came down the road. Women with sick children, old men with tired mules, travelers seeking nothing but a moment's rest. They'd stop at the fence, whisper a prayer and leave. Word had spread beyond the valley. Some called Solomon a miracle, others called him witchcraft. Either way, hope was moving again, and people followed it like smoke. Harlan hated the attention. "We ain't no sideshow," he grumbled. But when he saw the faces of those who came, hollow, hungry, but gentle, he didn't send them away. Sometimes, when no one watched, he'd stand beside Solomon and rest his hand on the horse's neck. "Don't make a fool of me," he'd mutter. The horse would breathe slow and steady like a promise kept. One afternoon, Clara found a boy outside the fence, younger than her, but hardened by hunger. "Is it true?" he asked. "The horse listens?" She nodded. "He listens to everyone." The boy climbed through the rails and stood trembling. "Then can he bring my brother back?" Clara's eyes fell. "He don't bring back what's gone. He helps you carry what's left." The boy frowned. "Then what's the use?" "To remember," she said, "so it don't hurt alone." He stayed quiet a long while before whispering a prayer too soft for her to hear. When he finished, Solomon lowered his head, brushing his muzzle against the boy's shoulder. The child gasped. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that only comes after tears. When he left, he turned once more. "You're lucky," he said to Clara. "You got someone who hears you." She didn't reply. She just looked at the horizon and whispered, "So do you." That summer, the valley bloomed again. Rain fell just enough. Crops rose from the mud. And for a while, peace seemed possible. Harlan even allowed Clara to ride Solomon through the lower field. The first time she climbed on, she held the reins like they were made of glass. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. The horse moved carefully, carrying her as though she were made of light. The rhythm of his steps matched her breathing. For a fleeting moment, she imagined they were flying, not escaping but belonging. From the porch, Mary smiled through tears. Harlan stood beside her, hat in hand, whispering to himself, "Maybe the Lord ain't done after all." But miracles are fragile things. They can't live too long in the hands of those who doubt them. And in the distance, over the ridge, dust was rising, the sign of riders coming from the south. Men who didn't believe in miracles, only in what they could buy. The next day, Bishop returned with 2 others. They rode up slow, eyes cold, voices loud. "Heard your horse works harder than a dozen," Bishop said. "Figure we'll take him for the mill." Harlan stepped forward. "Ain't for sale." Bishop spat tobacco into the dirt. "I wasn't asking." The men dismounted. Clara ran from the porch, arms out. "You can't take him," Bishop sneered. "You still think it listens to your prayers? Then pray fast." He reached for the reins. Solomon reared, hooves flashing like lightning. One man stumbled back, blood on his cheek. Bishop cursed, drawing his pistol. "Easy," Harlan barked. "Ain't worth blood." But Bishop aimed anyway. The gun clicked, jammed. He froze, pale. The horse stood unmoving, steam rising from its nostrils. Bishop's hand shook. "Devil's beast," he whispered. "Keep it then." The men mounted up and rode off without looking back. Silence filled the valley again. Clara reached for Solomon's face, voice trembling. "You heard me again, didn't you?" The horse lowered his head until their foreheads met, and in that touch, she felt what she'd never been able to name, the sound of mercy breathing. That night, as fireflies lit the grass like tiny lanterns, Harlan sat alone on the porch. The world was quiet except for crickets and the low hum of the river. He stared at the barn door left open and whispered into the dark, "If you ever listen to her, listen to me now." His voice broke. teach me how." From the barn came a soft whinny, low, patient, forgiving. And Harlan, the man who hadn't prayed in 20 years, bowed his head for the first time since the flood. By late summer, the air grew heavy again, thick with the smell of soil and sweat. The crops reached their tallest, waving like an ocean of green under a tired sun. Nashville's hills turned gold at the edges, and the valley hummed with cicadas that never seemed to rest. Peace had returned, but peace in that land was never free. It always waited to be broken. Clara spent her days helping Mary hang laundry and her nights in the barn. She slept beside Solomon's stall, head resting against the wooden beam, whispering stories about her parents, about rivers and storms and the world beyond the hills. The horse would lean closer each time, his breath warming her hair. To her, he was more than a creature. He was a witness. Every prayer, every dream, every fear she spoke into the air, she believed passed through him and found its way to heaven. One night, while fireflies blinked outside like scattered candles, she told him the secret she'd never said aloud. "I don't remember their faces anymore," she said softly. "Mama's laugh, Papa's voice, they're fading. But when you breathe, it sounds like them." The horse exhaled deep and slow. The sound filled the barn like a sigh from another world. Clara closed her eyes and smiled. "I knew you'd remember for me." September came, and with it, the dry wind. The leaves turned brittle and the wells sank lower. Farmers prayed for rain, but none came. The river shrank to a ribbon of brown water, and the land began to ache again. Harlan's temper returned with the drought. Every failure felt like betrayal. "Useless beast," he grumbled, "eats more than he earns." Clara tried to defend Solomon, but Harlan's voice cut through her words. "The world don't need saints. It needs work." That night, Clara overheard him speaking to Mary. "Tomorrow he's gone. Bishop offered coin again." Mary gasped. "You can't. The child, she'll learn." The sound of their argument dissolved into the hum of crickets. Clara's heart thudded so loud she thought it might wake the dead. When the house fell quiet, she packed a small bundle, her harmonica, a piece of bread, a torn handkerchief with her mother's initials. Then she crept into the barn. Solomon stirred, sensing her. "We're leaving," she whispered. "Tonight." She untied the rope with trembling hands. The stars outside seemed to pulse, the night thick with the scent of hay and fear. She pressed her face to his neck. "We'll find a place where no one hits you, where we can pray out loud." They slipped into the dark, moving through the tall grass toward the river road. The moonlight painted silver across Solomon's scars. For the first time in years, Clara felt free. She hummed to keep her courage steady. But freedom never lasts long, where men still own things. At dawn, Harlan discovered the empty stall. His shout tore through the air like thunder. "Gone!" he roared. He saddled his mule and followed the tracks, fury burning brighter than the sun. Mary pleaded, "Please, she's just a child." But he was already halfway down the road. Hours later, Clara reached the river. It was lower now, but wide enough to stop her. She sat on the bank, exhausted, watching Solomon drink. "We'll rest," she said, "then cross." The sound of hoofbeats cracked through the quiet. Harlan appeared on the ridge, silhouette black against the light. "Clara!" he shouted. "You come back now!" She stood, shaking her head. "You'll hurt him again." "I'll hurt worse if you keep running." She stepped into the shallows, water biting cold against her ankles. "He listens to God," she said. "You don't." Harlan's face twisted, not from anger, but something else, something closer to shame. "The world don't work on prayers," he said, voice breaking. "It works on what you hold on to." Clara took another step, and her foot slipped on the mud. She stumbled, crying out. Solomon surged forward, pulling her back to shore. The sight broke something open in Harlan. He dropped the whip into the water and fell to his knees. "All right," he whispered. "All right. Keep him. Keep it all." The wind shifted. Clouds gathered, dark and heavy. The first drop of rain struck the river like a drumbeat. Clara laughed through tears. "You see, he hears us both." That storm lasted 3 days. When it cleared, the valley glistened like glass. The river swelled but didn't flood, as if remembering mercy. Harlan never spoke of selling Solomon again. Instead, he built a new fence and repaired the roof of the barn. Clara helped, humming as she worked. The rhythm of her song carried through the fields, soft and steady. Neighbors noticed the change. "Harlan's place looks alive again," they said. "That orphan must have bewitched him." But others said it different. Maybe she prayed the devil out of him. Harlan didn't care which story they believed. Each evening he'd stand by the gate, watching the horse graze, his hands still rough but lighter somehow. Once he whispered, "You're the only creature I ever met that don't ask for anything but breath." Autumn bled slowly into early frost. The air smelled of smoke and cold apples. One evening Clara brought the harmonica to the porch. "You think music can save a soul?" she asked. Mary smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's the only thing that ever did." So Clara played. The notes floated down to the barn where Solomon stood, listening. The sound was rough at first, then pure, a melody that seemed older than time. It wrapped around the house, around the trees, and vanished into the stars. That night, Harlan dreamed again, of the river, of his lost sons, and of the horse standing in the middle of the water, shining like bronze. When he woke, he didn't feel the usual emptiness. For the first time in decades, he whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know to whom. But life never stops testing the faithful. In late October, sickness came down the valley, a fever that burned like wildfire. It started with the children, then the elders, then everyone in between. People said it was the river's revenge. Others said it was the hand of God closing its fist. On the third night, Mary collapsed by the hearth, skin pale and slick with sweat. Harlan sat beside her, helpless. "Stay with me," he begged. She smiled faintly. "Don't you see? He sent that horse so we'd remember how to love." Her eyes rolled back, breath fading. Clara prayed harder than she ever had. "Please, not her. Not her." Solomon poured the dirt outside, restless, as if feeling the fever himself. Then, just before dawn, a sound broke through the stillness, the deep, echoing cry of a horse that seemed to carry sorrow and promise all at once. Mary's eyes fluttered open. "You hear that?" she whispered. "He's praying too." Her fever broke that same morning. By noon, she was sitting up, weak but smiling. Harlan looked out toward the barn, his eyes wet. "Maybe," he murmured. "Faith don't always need a preacher." From that day, no one doubted Solomon's power, not even Harlan. Travelers came again, bringing offerings of apples, bread, and songs. They said their children slept easier when they spoke the horse's name. They said crops grew stronger near the fence line. Harlan charged nothing. "If grace comes cheap," he told them, "it ain't grace." Clara kept her prayers between her and Solomon. "We done good," she'd whisper. "They believe again." But deep down, she knew faith is a living thing, and living things must die before they're reborn. The air had started to cool again, and with it came an ache behind her ribs she couldn't explain. One evening, under a violet sky, she coughed blood into her hand. Just a drop, bright as a berry. She wiped it on her dress before anyone saw. "I'm fine," she told Solomon. "Just tired." The horse lowered his head, eyes glistening. She laughed weakly. "Don't you worry. I'll be all right. You just keep listening." Outside, the first frost of winter began to spread over the fields, glittering like salt on an open wound. Winter came early that year. The air hardened around the barns, and frost painted white veins across the glass of every window. The Harlan farm, which had survived drought, storm, and gossip, now fell quiet again. Even the river slowed, its song turning to whispers under thin ice. The people of the valley said it was a holy silence, that after so much mercy, God was resting. But mercy never rests for long. Clara's cough deepened. She tried to hide it, but her small frame betrayed her. Her cheeks burned at night and chilled by morning. Mary begged her to stay in bed, yet she still rose before dawn to see Solomon. "If I miss one prayer," she said, "he might think I forgot." The horse, now graying at the muzzle, seemed to sense her weakness. He moved slower, waited longer before eating, and leaned his weight against the stall whenever she came close, as if offering himself as support. Harlan noticed. "You're both fading," he muttered, though his voice lacked the anger it once held. Each night he sat at the kitchen table, listening to the sounds beyond the walls. The rasp of her cough, the creak of the barn in the wind. He'd been a man of order, of rules and control. Now he found himself praying without words. One morning, after a long snow, Clara didn't come out of her room. Mary called her name twice before entering. The child lay pale under the quilt, her breath shallow as a candle flame. "You need the preacher," Mary said, but Clara shook her head. "No preacher. Just him." Mary's lips trembled. "It's too cold to move you." "Then bring him here," Clara whispered. But Solomon hadn't left the barn in weeks. Harlan said the snow was too deep. the ground too slick. Still, as night fell, he wrapped himself in a coat and opened the barn door. The horse raised his head, eyes reflecting the lantern light. "She's calling for you," Harlan murmured. "You best go." He led the animal through the snow, step by heavy step, until they reached the porch. Inside, Mary wept softly as Clara stirred. "He's here," she said, voice breaking. Harlan pushed open the door. The horse stood in the doorway, steam rising from his body like incense. Clara smiled faintly. "You came," she whispered. She reached out, and he lowered his head until his muzzle brushed her palm. Her eyes closed. The room seemed to breathe with them. One human, one beast, one prayer without sound. Then, with a sigh that seemed to echo from the walls themselves, the child went still. The candlelight flickered. Solomon lifted his head and let out a low cry that rose and deepened until it filled the air. Not rage, not sorrow, but something beyond both. A sound that broke open the night. Outside, the wind stopped. The snow ceased falling. The world paused as if listening. Mary fell to her knees. Harlan removed his hat. He had no words, only the memory of every moment he had failed to believe. They buried Clara beneath the sycamore tree, where she had first sung that summer long ago. The ground was hard, but the men worked until dawn. Harlan placed her harmonica beside the small wooden cross. "You'll have music still," he said. After the funeral, the valley changed. The church bells rang, though no one pulled the ropes. Birds returned early, landing on the barn roof as if drawn by unseen hands. And each morning at the same hour Clara used to pray, Solomon would walk to her grave and stand in silence, head bowed. People came to see it. They whispered, cried, left offerings, apples, ribbons, scraps of paper with prayers written in trembling hands. "The horse mourns," they said. "He remembers." But Harlan knew it wasn't memory. It was faith, a faith stronger than his own, forged not in fear, but in love. By midwinter, snow piled high against the barn. Harlan shoveled a path each day so Solomon could reach the sycamore. He was thinner now, his movements stiff, yet his eyes still carried light. Sometimes Harlan spoke to him. "I don't know what she saw in you," he'd say, "but I reckon it was what I lost." One night during the heaviest storm of the season, the wind howled like the river had risen again. Harlan sat by the fire listening. Through the roar, he heard a sound, faint, distant, but real, a whinny that cut through the storm. He rose, heart pounding, and opened the door. The barn lights flickered through the snow. He found Solomon standing at Clara's grave, half covered in white, unmoving. "Come inside, you fool," Harlan called. The horse didn't move. Harlan stepped closer, shouting, "You'll freeze." Then he stopped. Solomon's head was lowered, his body still as the tree beside him. The snow around his hooves was untouched. No tremor, no breath. Harlan fell to his knees. "No," he whispered. "Not you too." He reached out, pressing a hand to the horse's neck. It was warm, somehow impossibly warm, and in that warmth he felt a pulse, steady, patient, then faintly a vibration beneath his palm. The low hum of a sound he had heard only once before, long ago in church. The sound of an organ playing through tears. The horse was singing, not with voice or breath, but with something deeper, something that made the very air tremble. Harlan looked toward the sycamore and saw the snow shift as if touched by invisible hands. The harmonica lying at the base of the grave rattled once, then twice, then began to play. A single note, long and pure, filled the night. Harlan wept, mouth open to the storm, listening as the sound faded into silence. When morning came, the storm had passed, and the valley glowed under a pale blue sky. Solomon was gone. No tracks, no body. Only the harmonica, resting clean atop the snow, and the faint outline of hooves leading toward the horizon. That spring the fields flourished again. The soil turned soft. The crops rose tall. People said the valley had been blessed twice, once by the girl and once by the creature who carried her prayers. Travelers carved small wooden horses and hung them in their homes for luck. Others planted sycamores near their barns, believing the roots could hear. As for Harlan, he rebuilt the fence one final time, then sat under the tree where Clara lay. He spoke softly, the way he imagined she once did. "I hear you both now," he said. "Took me too long, but I do." He closed his eyes, the wind moving gently through the leaves above, and if one listened close enough, There was a sound in that wind, a faint breath, a whisper between worlds, a horse and a child still praying together. The snow melted slow that year, turning the valley into a sea of silver mud. The thaw carried the smell of life and memory, damp earth, old hay, smoke, and something sweeter, like rain meeting stone. By March, the hills outside Nashville were green again, but the Harlan farm remained hushed, as though afraid to wake what it had already buried. No one had seen Solomon since that final storm. Some said he'd been taken by angels, others that he'd walked into the river and vanished. But every dawn, the earth near the sycamore was marked by fresh tracks, small depressions pressed into the soil, as though something unseen had been standing there through the night. Harlan never spoke of it. He rose each morning, made his coffee, sat by the window and stared at the empty pasture. Age had taken his strength, but not his eyes. And sometimes he swore he saw movement near the tree, a flicker of light that bent like breath. When it happened, he would whisper, "I know you're still here." Mary would find him there at dusk, his cup cold in his hands. "You talk to ghosts now?" she'd ask gently. "Not ghosts," he'd say, "just what's left of grace." By summer, the valley had changed again. The people who once came for miracles now came to remember. They brought their children to the sycamore, left ribbons tied to its branches, sang songs Clara once sang. The preacher, humbled by what he couldn't explain, called the spot the listening field. He said it was where silence had learned to speak back. Harlan built a bench beside the grave. Every Sunday he sat there while the bells rang from the church miles away. He would hum under his breath, a broken tune stitched from memory. Sometimes when the wind passed through the grass just right, it sounded like a harmony joined him. Soft, steady, familiar. One afternoon, a stranger rode up the road, a young woman with a child in her arms. Her dress was patched, her boots torn. "This the place?" she asked. "The one where the horse listened?" Harlan nodded. "You come for prayer?" She smiled faintly. "I come for hope. My boy ain't spoken since his daddy died. Folks said maybe here he'll find words again." Harlan motioned for her to sit. They knelt by the tree, the boy clutching a small wooden horse carved from pine. "Say something, son," the mother whispered. The child stared at the grave, lips trembling. For a moment, nothing. Then, a breath, a single syllable. "Here." The mother gasped, tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. "He spoke." Harlan smiled, though his eyes shone. He did more than that. He was heard. Word spread again, and once more the valley filled with voices. But this time, Harlan didn't hide from them. He welcomed each traveler, handed them water, listened to their stories. "Ain't my miracle," he'd say. "It's theirs, the girl and the horse. I just keep the gate open." Years passed. Nashville grew louder. Factories, trains, the new hum of radios spilling music into the hills. But out in that quiet valley, time still moved by the rhythm of the wind. The Harlans aged. The sycamore grew wider, its roots thick as faith. In spring, white blossoms scattered across the grave like snow. In summer, the grass around it glowed gold under the sun. Sometimes children who played too close swore they heard hooves on the dirt, though nothing passed by. "That's Solomon," their parents said, "still walking his rounds." And when thunder rolled, they'd add, "He's just talking to God again." Harlan never corrected them. He liked the way belief sounded in a child's mouth. It reminded him that faith wasn't about proof. It was about remembering what you once dared to love. In his final years, he began to keep a journal. The pages were rough, his handwriting crooked. The first entry read, "I used to think faith was for the weak. Then I met something stronger than pride." Another said, "If you listen long enough, even silence starts telling the truth." He wrote less as his hands began to tremble. The last line in the book, written just weeks before he died, was simple. "When the horse breathes, I breathe with him." On the morning he passed, Mary found him sitting on the bench under the sycamore, hat in his lap, eyes open toward the horizon. The birds were singing. The wind was soft. It looked as though he'd fallen asleep mid-prayer, and beside him, pressed into the dirt, were fresh hoofprints leading away into the field. The farm changed hands after that. A new family moved in, built new fences, painted the barn white, but the grave and the tree remained untouched. They said it was cursed. They said it was blessed. Either way, no one dared move it. In the evenings, the children of the new owners would sit by the tree, playing tunes on a harmonica they'd found hidden under the floorboards. The sound was thin but haunting, drifting across the fields. And each time they played, their mother swore she saw a shape moving at the edge of the pasture, large, steady, shimmering like heat over water. Probably just the wind, her husband would say. But she knew wind didn't leave hoofprints. As years turned to decades, the legend grew. Songs were written, stories told. They said the horse who heard the prayer still roamed the hills, watching over the broken and the lost. Some claimed he appeared on nights when lightning split the sky. Standing under the sycamore, ears turned toward heaven. One night in the early 1950s, a young musician driving from Memphis to Nashville stopped when his truck broke down by the old road. He wandered into the field, drawn by a faint light. There under the tree he saw a shape, a horse, silver gray, eyes shining like mirrors. It looked at him, motionless. The wind stilled. The man took off his hat, heart pounding. "You real," he whispered. The horse blinked once, then bowed its head. The man felt tears rise for no reason he could name. He knelt, said a prayer he hadn't prayed since he was a boy, and when he opened his eyes, the field was empty. But the song he wrote that night, a song about mercy and dust and a whisper in the wind, became a hymn that spread across every church in the South. No one knew where it came from. He said only, "I didn't write it. I heard it." Decades later, when the farm finally fell to ruin and the land returned to grass, travelers still found their way there. The sycamore still stood. The bench had rotted away, but the grave remained, marked only by time. On quiet mornings, when the mist rose from the river, the sound of hooves could still be heard moving slow and sure through the fog. Those who heard it said it wasn't frightening. It was comforting, like a prayer answering back. Time forgets names, faces, and even miracles. But somewhere in the hills outside Nashville, there is still a place where sound bends toward the earth and the earth listens back. They call it the listening field. The preacher's girl, the horse without a name. Their story was never written in books. It lives only in the hush between storms, in the breath of wind that carries across open land. When the thunder rolls, some still swear they hear it. A harmony between a child's voice and a horse's cry, two broken souls teaching heaven how to listen. And if you ever find yourself there, standing beneath the sycamore, close your eyes, breathe, then speak your prayer out loud. Because in that valley, every prayer, no matter how small, still has someone listening.